Law is often treated as a technical subject, distant from everyday life and handled by specialists. In reality, law quietly shapes how societies function, determining ownership, authority, obligation, and belonging in ways most people rarely notice. Every stable society depends on rules that define acceptable behavior. Without such rules, power relies entirely on force or custom. Law transforms power into something predictable, repeatable, and less dependent on individual strength or personality. In the Roman Empire, law was not secondary to politics or warfare. It was one of the main tools through which Rome governed. Armies expanded territory, but law organized life within that territory. This is History and Society, a channel where we examine how systems and ideas shaped human civilization. In this video, we explore how Roman law shaped society inside the Roman Empire, and why its influence lasted long after Rome's political power declined. Rome ruled an empire that stretched across continents. Its population spoke many languages, followed different customs, and practiced diverse religions. Governing such diversity through force alone would have required endless violence and constant supervision. Law offered a different solution. By establishing written rules that applied across regions, Rome created a shared framework of order. People could live under Roman rule without fully adopting Roman culture. Written law reduced uncertainty. When rules are visible and relatively stable, people can plan their lives around them. Expectations replace guesswork, and daily activity becomes more orderly. Roman law did not exist to create equality. Its primary purpose was stability. By defining rights, duties, and limits clearly, it reduced conflict and made social relationships more predictable. Disputes that might otherwise turn violent could be redirected into legal procedures. This did not eliminate injustice, but it reduced chaos. Law transformed conflict into something manageable. Through law, power became impersonal. Authority was expressed through procedures, documents, and offices, rather than constant displays of force. This made domination quieter and more sustainable. People encountered Rome not only through soldiers, but through contracts, courts, and officials acting in the name of law. The empire became present in everyday transactions. This impersonality mattered. Rules provoke less resistance than rulers. When authority appears procedural rather than personal, compliance feels less like submission and more like routine. One of the most important areas shaped by Roman law was property. Ownership was carefully defined and legally protected. Land and goods became assets recognized by law rather than possessions held only by force. Secure property rights encouraged long-term thinking. Farmers improved land they knew they could keep. Families accumulated wealth across generations. Law reduced fear of loss. Trade expanded under these conditions. Roman contract law allowed agreements between individuals who did not know each other. Trust became institutional rather than personal. Enforceable contracts reduced risk. Merchants could plan shipments, investments, and partnerships knowing disputes had recognized solutions. Economic activity expanded across the empire. Markets connected distant regions. Cities grew as centers of trade and administration. Law did not create wealth directly, but it created conditions where economic complexity could develop. Family life was also shaped by law. Marriage was not only a social arrangement, it was a legal institution that defined authority, obligation, and inheritance. The Roman household reflected broader social hierarchy. Legal authority rested with the head of the family. This structure reinforced stability and continuity within society. By shaping property, trade, family life, and authority, Roman law became more than a set of rules. It became the framework through which Roman society understood order and power. Roman law also defined personal status with precision. Individuals were categorized as citizens, non-citizens, freed persons, or slaves. These categories were legal identities that determined rights, protections, and limitations in daily life. Citizenship was not merely symbolic. It granted access to courts, legal protection against certain punishments, and participation in public life. Law transformed citizenship into a powerful instrument of inclusion and privilege. At the same time, citizenship was not universal. Roman law accepted inequality as a structural feature of society. Rights were distributed according to status rather than shared equally among all people. This clarity reduced ambiguity. Individuals knew where they stood within the system. While unjust by modern standards, this predictability limited social confusion and constant negotiation over position. If you find value in understanding how systems like law quietly shape societies over centuries, you may consider subscribing to History and Society. This channel focuses on the structures and ideas that influence human civilization beyond events and personalities. Rome used law strategically to expand citizenship over time. Granting legal status to conquered peoples reduced resistance and encouraged loyalty. Integration occurred without dismantling existing hierarchies. In this way, Roman law functioned as both a tool of control and a mechanism of cohesion. It unified diverse populations under a single legal framework while preserving Roman dominance. Slavery was also stabilized through law. Enslaved individuals were legally defined as property rather than persons. This definition removed uncertainty and normalized exploitation within the economic system. By giving slavery a clear legal structure, Rome reduced disorder while reinforcing inequality. Law did not challenge the institution. It made it orderly, predictable, and economically reliable. Government authority was similarly shaped by legal structure. Offices had defined powers, duties, and limits. Authority was attached to position rather than personal strength or charisma. Even emperors framed their rule as guardianship of law rather than arbitrary command. Presenting power as lawful increased legitimacy and reduced perceptions of tyranny. Corruption existed, but law provided standards against which behavior could be judged. Officials were expected to operate within recognized procedures, preserving continuity across administrations. Roman law also changed how conflict unfolded. Disputes were redirected into courts and formal processes. Argument replaced violence as the accepted method of resolution. This shift did not eliminate injustice, but it reduced instability. Procedure slowed emotional reaction and introduced distance between conflict and outcome. Law reshaped language itself. Legal concepts such as obligation, liability, and responsibility entered everyday understanding. People learned to describe problems in legal terms. Through this process, identity became partly legal. A person was defined not only by family or tradition, but by rights and duties recognized by law. Urban life depended heavily on these legal frameworks. Cities operated as legal entities with defined privileges, obligations, and administrative structures. Despite cultural diversity, cities across the empire functioned in similar ways. Law unified space without erasing local customs, allowing administrative consistency. Infrastructure relied on legal coordination. Roads, aqueducts, and public buildings required property rules, labor obligations, and authority recognized by law. Large-scale organization became possible because law aligned individual action with collective goals. Cooperation could be enforced rather than assumed. Through administration, courts, and routine interaction, Roman law embedded itself into daily experience. It became familiar rather than exceptional, shaping behavior quietly and persistently. Roman law also shaped how time was experienced within society. Legal continuity connected past, present, and future. Decisions made today carried consequences beyond individual lifetimes, encouraging long-term thinking at a collective level. This mattered for stability. In societies ruled mainly by force or custom, change often arrived suddenly and violently. Roman law slowed change by introducing procedure, review, and formal process. Disputes followed defined paths. Complaints required formal steps. Judgments followed recognized rules. This structure inserted time between conflict and resolution, reducing impulsive reactions. Delay was not weakness. It protected the system. By forcing conflict into procedure, law reduced the risk of escalation and social breakdown. Order became routine rather than fragile. Courts transformed conflict into language. Arguments replaced weapons. Evidence replaced intimidation. Even when outcomes favored elites, the process itself reinforced legitimacy. Legal language standardized thought. Concepts such as obligation, responsibility, and liability became familiar. People learned to frame problems in legal terms rather than personal retaliation. Through repetition, this legal mindset became habitual. Law was no longer exceptional. It became part of how people understood fairness, authority, and resolution. Most individuals encountered law not through punishment, but through routine interactions. Buying land, settling disputes, registering inheritance. Law became woven into ordinary life. This familiarity produced normalization. Compliance felt expected rather than imposed. People adjusted behavior automatically to fit legal boundaries. When political institutions weakened, these habits remained. Law survived not only in texts, but in practice and expectation. This explains its endurance beyond Rome itself. Legal education preserved Roman thinking. Jurists studied cases, extracted principles, and transmitted them across generations. Law became teachable knowledge, independent of individual rulers. In the Eastern Empire, Roman law was collected and organized. This effort preserved legal memory even as political conditions changed. Law became an intellectual inheritance. When the Western Empire declined, political authority fragmented. Yet Roman legal concepts did not disappear. Local rulers adopted them because they solved practical problems. Roman law offered clarity where chaos threatened. It organized land, power, and obligation. Societies reused these tools because they worked. Over time, Roman legal principles blended with local customs. The result was adaptation, not imitation. Roman law became a foundation rather than a relic. This foundation shaped emerging European states. Authority became institutional rather than personal. Power operated through offices governed by rules. Law separated the ruler from the role. Governments could persist beyond individual lives. Continuity replaced dependence on personality. Economic expansion relied on these inherited legal structures. Contracts, property rights, and courts enabled growth within frameworks shaped by Roman thought. Roman law did not aim to shape the modern world. It aimed to manage an ancient empire. Its survival was an unintended consequence of effectiveness. Systems that work tend to endure. Roman law balanced rigidity with flexibility. It adapted without collapsing, preserving order while allowing change. Rome's political power collapsed, its borders vanished, and its armies disappeared. Yet its legal ideas continued to shape how societies organized authority and behavior. For more explorations into the systems that quietly shape history, you may subscribe to History and Society.